Okay, hi guys. We are starting our next tutorial and it's going to be 6.4 and it's called conditionals, okay? Conditionals are also called if statements or else and else if statements, okay? If statements or if else if statements. All right, and basically what they mean are they're waiting for an event to happen to trigger another event, right? So if something happens, then do this other thing. Okay, so for example, the example we're going to be using is if you're out of lives, then your game is over, that sort of thing. Okay, um, so to use the example from the other day, the one where I talked about class, students walking in late, so I can use an if statement to say, if you are late, go see the principal, or if you are out of uniform, then go and get a uniform slip or whatever. Okay, so those are examples of when you would use an if statement, and if those conditions are not met, then you don't do anything. So for example, if I said, if student is late, go get a late slip, otherwise sit down and join class, right? Okay, so that would be an if statement. So let's look at how that works. We're going to be doing a little tutorial here. You guys are going to follow along. And there's a variable that we're going to create, and the variable is going to be 3. And then there are going to be these buttons, okay? So the orange button removes a life, okay? And the blue button adds life. And the conditional is if this drops down to 0, then you're going to die. Okay, so we go down to 1, and when it drops down to 0, we turn her into a skeleton. And then we stop all the other functions. So notice that this finishes everything. Okay, so there's a couple of if statements there. All right, let's take a look at how that works. We'll create a new file here. Okay, so first of all, we don't need the cat, so we'll get rid of the cat, and we're going to add in some new sprites. The first one we're going to need is a girl named Max, so we'll grab her and put that around there. We're going to also need skeleton. There's our skeleton. Okay, put that there, and then we're going to need 2 buttons. So let's grab this guy, and we're going to duplicate this because we're going to have 2 versions. Okay, we're going to name them. So this one here will be called, I forget which one was on the left, but I think it was 1 up. So we'll call that 1 up, and we'll call this one die. Okay, and Max can be remained Max, and skeleton is going to be Skelly. Okay, oops, Skelly. All right, let's just position these so that they work the way I want them to work. So let's start off with skeleton. I've already sort of worked out the positioning. So we're gonna go -4 and -15 at 100% size, okay? We're gonna go to Max and we're gonna change her costume from this kind of wide arms thing to this 3rd position here, okay? Back to code. And once that's done, we're gonna change her to be at 0, 0, and we're going to make her size 150 so that she matches up roughly with our skeleton. Okay, so they're going to be in the same position. And then finally, our buttons, 1 up is going to be positioned at -150 and 0, and our die button is going to be 150 and 0, and we're also going to change the costume to the orange, which is the 2nd costume. Okay, so there, we're now set up with our positioning. Okay, everything looks like it should look. The only thing that doesn't look the way it should is that we see the skeleton, and we're going to fix that in a second. We need to add in our variable. Okay, so we're going to go down to variables over here. I'm going to click my variable, which shows up here, and by default, our variable is equal to 0. Okay, all right, so that's all we need to do for our setup. Once we've done that sort of positioning and setup of our file, we need to start adding in our code blocks. So the first thing we need to do is we need to say we want 3 lives. So let's start off with Max. Okay, we're going to click on Max here, and it's going to give us our code for Max. And we're going to go, let's set our variable to 3. Okay, now we could rename this variable as lives, but because we're only going to be using 1 variable in this example, we'll just leave it at my variable. Okay, so I'm going to set this to 3. Now, when do I want this to happen? Well, I want it to happen when I start this game by pressing the green flag. So let's go to our events, grab it when flag is clicked, and we'll connect those. All right, so as soon as I click this, it sets this to 3. Now, this is on Max. We also want this on Skelly. The reason that is true, I'll explain once we get to it. It basically has to do with visibility, and we'll talk about that a little later. Okay, so basically, when we run this, it doesn't change anything because either one, Max or Skelly will set our variable to 3. Okay, so I run this, our variable is set to 3. Okay, now we've got our 3 elements on our stage here. We don't want to see the skeleton at the beginning, right? If you remember from the demo, we only want to see the girl because we're alive. Until this drops down to 0, this should be hidden. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do then is we're going to go to our skeleton here, which is this, and we're going to add in under our looks palette here, we're going to go and grab hide, and we're going to put hide right there. Okay, so now when I run this, when I click this, it's going to do 2 things. It's going to set our variable to 3, and it's going to hide our skeleton. So there's our skeleton gone. Okay, and so that's working the way we want it to work. The other thing we need to do, and we'll do this afterwards, we won't do this yet, okay, but we are going to come back and turn max kind of the opposite, right? So where we have this as hidden, we need to tell this one, max, to show. And the reason we need to do that is because if we don't do that at the end of the game, like after we play this, we need to reset it. So we need to reset that in somewhere, okay? And so I'm going to just remind myself to come back to that. Okay, all right, so hopefully that makes sense so far. And you know what I'll do is I'll take show and I'll just put it here to remind myself that it's got to go in here at the beginning, okay? All right, because it's not attached to anything, so it's not going to do anything. It's just going to sit there. Okay, so next we need to do a couple things. We need to start telling these buttons that they have a job to do. So let's go to 1UP. 1UP is going to increase our variable. Right now our variable is 3, and 1UP is going to say let's make our variable 1 more than it is. Okay, so let's go to our events. It's going to be on a click. So when I click on this sprite, my variable is going to be increased by 1. So let's go change my variable by 1. Okay, so 1UP increases my variable. So when I click this, you'll see it's updating my variable. Okay, great. Set that. Okay, obviously I also need to remove or change my variable by -1 when I die. So let's do the same thing here. Events, when this sprite is clicked, change my variable by -1. Okay, good. All right, reset, and let's just check that these are working, and they are. Okay, sets my variable up, sets my variable down. I accidentally moved this. I'm just going to put this back to where it should be. That should be at -150, and that should be at 0. Okay. Okay, so far everything seems to be working the way it should be, right? We click on our die button, we lose a life. We click on our 1UP button, and we gain a life. Now here, we haven't done any conditionals yet. Here's where the conditional part comes in. The conditionals are going to be checking if this variable ever drops down below 1, or down to 0, really. Right, if it drops down to 0, then we have to do 2 things. We have to hide max and show the skeleton. Okay, actually we have to do some other things as well. We need to stop the scripts on these, but for now the 2 main points are we need to say, okay, you're out of lives, and this turns down to Shelly turns on and Max turns off. Okay, so let's do that. Let's first go to Max. Okay, actually I'll go to Skelly first because we've sort of set this one up. Now we're going to do this in 2 parts. Okay, the first part is going to be the conditional, because we're also going to need a loop. So let's first do the conditional. The conditional is this guy here. Okay, this is what we're learning today. It's the if statement. Okay, so it's going to be saying if something, then do something else. Okay, so let's grab this. If a condition is met, then do something. Well, first of all, what's the thing that we want to do? Well, we're talking about the skeleton. So if something condition is met, then we want to show the skeleton. So let's go grab our looks and grab our show, and I'm going to drag that and put it in here. So if the condition is met, show the skeleton. Well, what's the condition? Well, the condition is that your lives has dropped down below 1, or is equal to 0. All right, so let's do that. Let's go down to our variables, and I'm going to say, well, if my variable here, I'm going to drag that out. If my variable is less than 1, which means it's 0, then show. And now I'm going to go to my operators, because notice that this won't fit here. I need this to be this shape. So let's go to our operators. These are our operators. Now I can do this a couple ways. I can go if my, could drag this one and be if it's less than, okay, so if my variable is less than 1, okay, or alternatively, I can just go if my variable is equal to 0. Now there are different reasons for when and why you would use these, but in this case, either one will work. Okay, so if my variable is equal to 0, drop that in there. Oops. Drop that in there. Okay, if my variable is equal to 0, then show. So let's try this. Let's make our variable down to 0. Okay, and now I'm going to go back to my skeleton and I'm going to run this. Okay, so it's going to say if my variable is 0, which it is, then show the skeleton. I click this and it shows the skeleton. Okay, which means that tells me that's working. Okay, so let's hide it again. All right. Now, here's sort of a little bit of a tricky part because this needs to happen all the time. So here's what's going to, if I, when I was trying to do this the first time through, I just added this here. The problem is that this if only gets checked when this is clicked, right, at the beginning of the project. So when I click this and I started, it's 3, and it just ran through and it checked if it's 0. And then when I drop this down to 0, it doesn't work. It didn't turn it on. And the reason is it's not checking anymore, right? If I go back here, it's only checking this when I click this button. So if I set this up to 0 now and then I click this, oops, hold on. Oh, see, even that's not going to work because this resets it to 3. So this is a mistake. What we want to do is that loop I mentioned. The reason we want to loop is because we always want to be checking if my variable is equal to 0. And if it is equal to 0, then show that skeleton. Okay, so let's go to our controls and we're going to have a forever loop. Okay, the forever loop is going to run as soon as you do this, set your variable, hide your skeleton, and then forever and ever keep checking if your variable is equal to 0. And if it is, then show the skeleton. Okay, so now let's try that. I run this, and you'll see that this yellow line shows up because it is always running this. Okay, so let's die a couple times here. So 2, 1, 0. Great. My variable is equal to 0. Show the skeleton. Wonderful. Okay, let's stop that. Reset everything. Okay, I'm going to stop again. And I'm going to add the same code to max, okay, or very similar code. So this goes when this is clicked, set my variable, and then hide. Okay, we're going to do the opposite here because we're going to have show. But I'm not going to add this in yet, and I'll show you why in a minute. Let's add in our forever loop. That goes here. Add in our if statement. That goes here. Add in our operator, which is if. This is going to be our variable, just here. The variable is equal to 0. Okay, then I want to hide this girl. So I'm going to clicks and I'm going to go to hide. All right, so this will now work. The only issue will be this, and you'll see why that matters in a second. So when the flag is clicked, set my variable to 3, and forever and ever keep checking if my variable is equal to 0. If it is equal to 0, then hide our girl. So let's run this. Okay, I'm going to go down, down, down. It hides the girl. It shows the skeleton. Great. And now I go to reset it, but she doesn't show up. And the reason she doesn't show up is because she's hidden. And because she's hidden, this does not apply properly. Okay, so let's stop that. And that's what I mentioned here. I want to put this show in here. Okay, so we go when this, set this to here, show, and then run this forever. All right, so now let's run that. Go. Stop that. Go. And if I die, it goes down to this. And the problem is that I can keep playing. So I need to add one more conditional into this, or two, I